So we're going through the 6th chapter. Actually, there are 3 chapters which are all going to deal with different kind of combinations of weird things and what language means. Really 3 chapters dealing with language. And this is 6, 7, 8. And then once we get into the 9th chapter, we're going to get into the question of how we release ourselves from vows. So if you like, the first 8 chapters of the Mishnah deal with making vows and what they mean. And from the 9th chapter, we start getting out of them. But as we're going through these first 8 chapters, we're going to go over more and more questions related to language. And I suppose we could say, look, what we're learning is the power of language. And in fact, I've heard the chief rabbi say once on Shavuot, of course, the power of language is that it can create a fact. So, for example, a contract or an agreement is a fact. It's a real thing, but it's created by a word. And we're seeing exactly the same thing. We're seeing a legal reality which is being created by a word. So we're going to have to be very careful about what words we use and about how we interpret those words. Now, we learned about the question of meat. So let's say this someone swears this meat is prohibited to me. Well, what about, if there's something else in the pot, like an egg, and the taste of the meat drifts into the something else? Well, is there something else prohibited? And we're going to drift now. We're going to move instantly from meat to wine. So you can see the sequence of the meal, really. You can see the mental thought of the rabbis. We're going to move from meat into wine. Hanoder min hayayin, someone who forswears wine. So this is wine in general. So we're going to be very specific about the language here. We're not talking about a specific cup of wine. We're talking about wine in general. Hanoder min hayayin, someone who swears off wine in general. Mutar b'tavshil sheyesh bo ta'am yayin. But in that case, he can eat food which contains wine taste. So that's the first principle. And we're going to see this principle play out again and again in the next three Mishnayot. If he forswears wine in general. But now let's forswear some specific wine. I forswear this wine if I taste it. So now I've made a vow on a specific cup of wine. And the Mishnah is now going to rule. Okay, that wine, that specific wine, fell into some food, some cooked food. If it falls into food and it's sufficient to give it taste, it's forbidden. So somehow the specific wine, if we forswear it, seems to, if you like, infect with taste, but the general wine does not. Yeah, the hanoder min hayayin, someone who swears wine in general, he can eat food which contains the taste of wine. So somehow this language seems to apply to the extent to which the object which is forsworn can spread. And we're going to go through similar kinds of examples, although the Mishnah is not as clear in these following examples as it has been in the wine example as to really what it's thinking about. Someone who forswears grapes is permitted wine. So again, he's forsworn grapes in general. And he's permitted the thing that comes out of the grape. It's a different thing comes out of the grape. So it works for olives too. Min hazeitim mutar b'shem. He forswears olives in general, but he can eat the olive oil. Amar kunam zeitim v'anamim elu. What if he says kunam? If I taste these olives and grapes, so we're going to have particular olives and grapes. At that point, kunam zeitim v'anamim elu sheni toem. A kunam, if I taste these olives and grapes, so the language, it's the full language of the oath, but it refers to specific olives and grapes. Asur bahen, asur bahen u vayotse mehen. So he's forbidden not only with these specific things, but in all their derivatives, everything that comes out of them. Just as with the wine, if he swore on this particular cup of wine, he's forbidden everything that the wine gives taste to if the wine spilt into the dish. Let's take the next example. Similar pattern. Someone who forswears dates in general, but they can eat date honey. Dvash tamarim, bee honey was really scarce in the time of the Mishnah. Nowadays, you can actually make a commercial hive. You can take honey out. You don't have to kill the bees. In those days, they didn't have hives with movable frames as we do today. That movable frames are only about 150 years old. And if you took honey out of a hive, you'd actually have to destroy the hive. So honey was much scarcer. And in general, dvash in Tanakh means date honey. Anyway, hanoder minat tamarim. Someone who forswears dates is permitted date honey. Mutar bidvash tamarim. Min sitvanyot, mutar b'chomet sitvanyot. If you forswear winter grapes are grapes that stay on the vine after autumn. So they sort of mature through the winter. I mean, today in Germany, they rot during the winter. Whether that's the case in the time of the Mishnah, I'm not sure. But they used to make vinegar out of them. So they'd go horribly and old on the vine, and then you'd make vinegar. And someone who forswears these old grapes can eat winter grape vinegar. Sit vanyot. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beter is going to make a general rule, which doesn't seem to match anything that we've learned so far. It's a different general rule. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beter omer, kol sheshem toldato kriya alav. Anything whose derivatives bear its name. So now we're not talking about swearing on the specific object, like this wine or earlier we swore on this wine or these grapes or these olives. Now we're swearing on something whose derivatives bear its own name. Anything whose derivatives bear its name, v'nadar hemenu, and he vows to abstain it, asur b'yotzeh hemenu v'chachamim matirin. He actually vows to abstain from the derivatives, v'chachamim matirin, although the sages actually permit. So this is a side opinion from Rabbi Yehuda ben Beter. So now we're going to have some examples of things that share names. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Beter would have forbidden them, but the sages are going to permit them. And this Mishnah goes according to the sages. So let's say I swear off wine, but I'm going to be permitted apple wine. Apple wine is not wine. It doesn't even come out of grapes. But it's got the same name. It's got the word wine in it. Yeah? Going back to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beter, he said, Kol shem tol lato kriya alav. Anything whose derivatives bear its name. So he's going to do a name play. Okay, so someone who forswears wine is permitted apple wine. Oil is permitted sesame oil. By the way, oil in the time of the Mishnah really means olive oil. Okay, it doesn't mean just vegetable oil you buy from the supermarket. It means olive oil, and olive oil is not sesame oil. So they have the same name, but it's not the same thing. He forswears off honey, but he's permitted date honey. Same name, different object. He swears off vinegar, but he's permitted vinegar, winter grape vinegar. Min hakreshim, from leeks, he's permitted porridge. So I'm sorry, porridge is a Sephardic translation. It's actually scallions, according to Kahati. I corrected this, but my correction just got lost and I was preparing at the last minute. But porridge are scallions in American language, according to Kahati. So leeks and scallions, right? They look incredibly close, but they're not the same thing. Min hayarak mutar biyarakot sadeh. From vegetables is permitted field vegetables. Now, again, we got the same name. I think field vegetables are not just the same vegetables you grow in your garden, but they've got the same name. Mipnei shehu lavui or lavi. And the Mishnah gives a reason for all of these because it's an accompanying name. So we're going to permit all of these because it's the name that goes with them, but it's not the substance. So I suppose we could say, look, well, we're driven by language here, not by substance, and that's of course one of the important messages running right the way through the tractate of Nedarim.